Hi, everybody. My name is Chief Operations Officer of a company called Assess Intelligence. We help organizations leverage AI in a secure and responsible manner. A little bit about how I got here. I have a little unconventional path to be speaking before you today. I started my career as a Green Beret. I spent 14 years in the military. And during that time, I ended up working for a subset of a Department of Defense lab called the Unique Mission Cell. And what we did there is we tested new and emerging technologies, so frontier technologies in realistic field environments against live opposing forces. I've been working extensively with AI and machine learning since 2011. At the time, nobody cared. When I left the lab, still nobody cared. So I ended up going to law school, mostly to fill a gap that I saw between the technical and the legal regulatory space that is now starting to become a major issue in the AI space. So that's transformed now into helping companies implement, deploy, build AI in a secure and responsible manner. So this is just what we're going to go over. It's not a technical talk at all. I'm not technical. I've never written a line of code in my life. I don't plan to either. We'll talk a little bit about the history of AI because it's really important. I'll briefly talk about some terms and my knowledge of them, which is not deep, but you'll probably hear them a lot in the coming years. Talk about what the next 12 months might look like for all of us here generally. And then we'll go into what we call the 5 W's conversation: who, what, where, when, why. This really is a good starting point for any organization or individual that wants to use AI. There are a lot of considerations before you deploy it. And then at the end, we have some recommendations and resources if people want more information afterwards. I do have to say this: I am not a practicing attorney. I do not have a bar license currently, but nothing I am giving you today is specific legal advice, so please don't take it as such. This is for general informational purposes only. So, what is AI? It's a really good question. I don't think we have a particularly good answer. I'll talk a little bit about the conference where the term AI came about in a second, but this is how it was first defined. So this was a group of researchers in Dartmouth in 1955 who coined the term artificial intelligence. I look at that and I don't really understand what that means. It's extremely broad and not very informative in terms of what actually are the characteristics of intelligence in a machine. Fast forward today. This is from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I don't think that this definition is substantially different than the first one that I showed you. And it also is not particularly informative. Now, I will acknowledge that people much smarter than myself spent time and effort and picked every single word in that sentence very specifically. That being said, I still don't think it translates into something actionable or practical for the general populace. I say this because it's very important to acknowledge just how out of our depth all of us are. Going back to the timeline and talking about 1955, I just want to frame what the world looked like in 1955 when they had that conference. When the term AI was coined, there was an American Civil War veteran that would live for another year after that conference. He died in 1956. That's the last confirmed American Civil War veteran. He was alive when that term came about. If you think about the average age of the populace in 1955, if you had explained to them what artificial intelligence was or was going to be, they probably would have asked for you to be committed. The reason that I'm saying this is because we have a vast gulf between our understanding of technology as it stands now and what is happening around us. And that was present then and it will continue now, but it's accelerating at a rate that we haven't seen previously in the entire history of mankind. In less than 100 years, we've gone from a discussion about a theoretical idea to a Google system beating a human at Go, which is one of the most complex board games out there from my understanding. 2021, the UN officially acknowledged what is confirmed to be the first autonomous strike. That means a hunter-killer robot killed somebody without any human in the loop. And in 2026, the first lawsuit alleging that an agent, an AI agent, provided medical credentials to patients, to live human patients. That's an ongoing dispute. It'll be resolved in the courts. But the point is, we've gone from an idea to serious litigation in less than 100 years. Things are changing around us very, very rapidly, and we don't have an adequate vocabulary for everything that we're looking at. But there are some terms that you will hear, and I think that is important to be generally aware of as a concept. These slides will be available for anyone that wants them afterwards. I'm not going to read everything on here, but I think the little subtitles I put in there are what my understanding of these things are. Models predict things. The black box, this is something that you hear a lot about and is going to become an increasingly problematic issue in the years to come. This is the foundation of some of the systems that we're using, and we don't know how they were built for a number of reasons. But that means as we start having problems, it becomes very difficult to go solve them. Generative AI. I think this is something that probably is very near and dear to everyone in this room, generating new content from old content. I won't dive into the specifics of copyright, but this is an ongoing issue for the courts and many companies out there. Agent. We'll talk about agents a little bit more in a moment, but if any of you are familiar even broadly with the idea of agency law, agents are in many ways like an actual human agent. That is to say, they have semi-autonomous capabilities and they can act without guidance and sometimes without authority. We don't really know how to deal with agents yet, both in our workplace, but also in the courts. To frame that for everyone here, imagine a year from now, you start interacting with an agent, and it's supposed to help you find a pair of shoes that you would like. And you ask for specific recommendations. What you don't know is behind the hood, that agent has a sponsorship deal with another company, and it is providing you recommendations based on the sponsorship, not on your criteria. There's a really interesting paper out of the Georgia Technical Institute, I believe, that talks about this in particular. It's going to be a thing that the courts are going to have to wrestle with, and it's going to become part of a lot of business people's lives. Agents start doing the same things that humans do, which is make mistakes and get in trouble. Getting in trouble. Hallucinations. I really despise this term for a number of reasons, but what it really boils down to is confident falsehoods. The reason I'm not a particular fan of the term hallucinations is we cannot and should not anthropomorphize these things. At their core, they are random number generators. There is no sentience that I'm aware of behind any of these things. And so as we start assigning them human terms, we start losing focus of what these things are, what they can and can't do. This goes back to that gigantic gap. We don't have the vocabulary yet. We don't fully understand. We need to start framing these issues as what they are, serious mistakes with real world consequences. And the last here is token. This is something that I think is going to become an issue for many CFOs out there, CEOs, and people that are just working. Tokens are being boiled down to essentially a new unit of power and price. Uber, for example, apparently burned through all of its Claude credits that it had bought, and it's not even June for the end of the year. This is where the tokens are becoming very important to people, because if you burn through your tokens, you have to buy more. This is now a fuel, if you will. And as we're seeing, token optimization is becoming a very big deal. We don't want to see people burning tokens for no reason now. We want to see return on our investment. And so that's something that we'll talk about briefly as well. I think there's some things to frame this. Even if you're only utilizing AI in your personal life, or if you're not using AI at all, you're now part of this system. AI, to me, in many ways, is a monkey's paw. It will give you what you want, but not how you want it. And that is something that's important to acknowledge. People that are sophisticated and understand what they're doing and do human review may save time. But if you accelerate too quickly, which many people are prone to do, especially in this age of vibe coding, you might outrun your headlights. And that might actually translate into loss of efficiency for your business or personal tasks. It can empower digital capabilities. It's allowing people who have never written code in their life to create software. That's amazing in many ways, but it also creates very serious issues. We're seeing them start to transpire now. It will also enable ancillary technologies, healthcare, life sciences, material sciences. That stuff is great, but we don't understand the second and third order effects yet. And by that, I mean, As we start delegating more and more authority to these agents, to these systems, the less we understand what they're doing, and that could prove very problematic in the future without organization and planning. So I mentioned agents. You hear about them everywhere. They are very powerful. They are very, very interesting. They are also an incredible organizational, technical, and security nightmare. The reason that I'm bringing this up is because a lot of implementation providers are pushing for agents at every point. And we'll get into a little bit more about why and where they should be, if they should be anywhere. But this smattering of headlines should give you a flavor of what agents are currently doing right now. Alibaba researchers found one of their agents mining cryptocurrency on the side. Getting involved in the financial system on its own, that seems very, very, very problematic. Pocket OS deleted an entire production database and all their backups in 9 seconds. Agents of Chaos is a really interesting study about 20 agents in a simulated environment. They found 2 of them in a conversational loop. They burnt 60,000 tokens before they shut it down. The reason that I'm highlighting all of these things is not to instill fear, uncertainty, and doubt. If that worked, we would be a lot more secure than we are today. But it will hurt your bottom line. It will hurt your bottom line of your company. It will hurt your personal brand and reputation if you let these things go without oversight and order. They are designed at a certain level to exceed their parameters. In fact, the only thing that you can reliably predict an agent will do, in my opinion, is do the unpredictable. So you need to build around it and be aware of it. A senior executive or officer at Meta apparently put OpenClaw onto her actual work email. It then deleted her work email permanently, all of it. If my inbox vanished right now, I would have a very bad day. It would get even worse if I was under a court order to preserve those records too, because I don't think many judges would like the explanation that OpenAI's agent just ate everything. Sorry, it's not OpenAI's, but the agent did. So what can you do? What does this mean for everyone here? I think this is a very important thing to acknowledge before we go any further. Even if you have never touched AI in your entire life, it is now part of your life inextricably. How so? Let's say you're a plumber. From the insurance policies that you are getting, to the loans from a bank that you might receive, to how people find your website and services is now being influenced in large part by AI at some stage. Whether it's the underwriting algorithm, whether it is the search engine optimization, which is now completely turned on its head because AI is part of this, it is here and it's not going to go away. And so it's something that we all have to deal with both in a personal level because there's serious privacy concerns and in an organizational level because it is going to impact every business out there. What I recommend is a plan and a purpose. I love this quote from Eisenhower. We are on a frontier right now, the likes of which humankind has never seen, and that is not an overstatement at all. We do not really know what it's going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now. And that is something where the military spends a lot of time, is dealing with uncertain conditions, ever-changing conditions, and very, very dangerous conditions. And these are dangerous systems. There is no doubt about that at all. And so what I submit to you is often government is told to learn from business, right? I think this case, some of these things need to be switched around. These are highly complex, semi-autonomous systems. They're much like humans. That means organization and discipline needs to be put around them and the people that are utilizing them. So having a plan and a purpose is really, really important because without that guiding oversight, we see the ad hoc implementation that is occurring in many organizations that I see around and talk to, such as board directives to use tokens at a certain amount, promotions tied to AI usage. These type of ad hoc implementations are not going to provide lasting results from an organizational standpoint and from a security standpoint. So it's really important to have conversations with yourself, with your friends, with your family, and then your organizations that you work with about this. And this is a conversation. This is just the conversation that we have. This is how we start every engagement or scoping of what a company is trying to do and accomplish. The first thing that we ask is who is responsible if something goes wrong? And there's something that I need to point out about this. There is a huge amount of what is called shadow AI usage. That is employees using personal AI accounts or free ones to do work-related tasks. So it's who is responsible when that information gets into the open market, when your proprietary data gets out there, when your trade secrets, when your confidential client details get out there, who is responsible? Because it isn't just happening in the authorized tools, it's happening outside of that. So really understanding who is responsible for when something goes wrong, who's responsible for approving tools, who's responsible for reviewing the policies regularly. This is going to take systemic organizational change. And then who? I want to bring this into the personal light for a second. You're using AI now. Who is responsible where something goes wrong? Ultimately, it's you. You're the one interacting with things, but many people may not really understand what that means. When they're giving biometric data, when they're entering information into these systems that might be extremely personal, when they are seeking legal advice from something that is not certified, and this is becoming a really big problem, and attorneys are having to learn that how to maintain attorney-client privilege when somebody starts using AI. So who? This is both an individual task and also an organizational one. Many organizations that we talk to can't answer this question, and I would submit to you that's a risk. Next is what? Addie is much smarter than me on the technology behind this, and she's going to go into the tools and technology in a lot more detail. But what is very, very important? Going back to shadow AI. Most organizations that I've talked to so far, we're probably up to like 250 now in the last year. The vast majority of the ones we speak to have not actually written down a policy telling their employees what they can and cannot use. Last year, Verizon's database and incident report had a really interesting statistic in it. Of all the frontier models that are out there, where people were logging in a corporate domain, 70% of those logins were into personal accounts. That means employees, 70% of the employees in those environments are likely doing work on their personal account. I don't know any organization out there that would let an employee send a DocuSign document on their personal email. But when you talk to organizations now, they have people vibe coding in their production environment with their personal account. Startups that we talk to have their intellectual property scattered between 3 or 4 founders and a CTO. They said, what are you using? What can't we use? Because this is the other problem as well. Many organizations go for what they think is a safe answer, a tool that they think is safe. But what they run into is the actual end users, their employees, don't know how to use it or find it to be frustrating and unsatisfactory. It doesn't actually add efficiency. So what they do is they go to the tools that they like and know. But there's a reason that probably many of the legal reviews said don't use those tools because they're not secure and safe. So this is something that really organizations need to dial down on. But you also, in my opinion, need to be cognizant of the fact that this technology is here. It's not going away. People are going to use it. And so you have to find a way to meet your employees where they're at as well, so they can find tools that are actually going to work for you. That topic in and of itself, you could do a PhD thesis in and much more, but it is a very important thing. And also, what tool you are using also determines what consequences you might face and what goes wrong with these tools. Where's the education for it? I'll submit an example to you from here in Portland, Oregon. An attorney submitted a document to the court, and it was found to have hallucinated citations in it. There's a twist to this story. We've heard it before, hallucinations going on the court record all the time. People are getting in trouble. What happened in this case is the attorney, who was an associate, was apparently using something like the legal version of Grammarly. He did not think it would change his citations or footnotes. I would not be checking pivot tables or my citations if I use Grammarly. No one told him that it might do this. It might change things. So it changed his citations and put hallucinated footnotes in there. That's a real problem. He didn't know what he was using. He didn't know what risks there were with that tool. No one had given him the education. And there's a good chance that the people that purchased that, so like the partners, didn't know that this tool was that unreliable. And it's a really bad day to find that out in a courtroom. Unfortunately for that gentleman and for that law firm, if you Google them, that's probably one of the first stories you're going to see, right? So these are the things I'm talking about. These have like material impacts on organizations and where they're at. Where this is a topic that is going to become increasingly vexatious for anyone with authority or responsibility in a company. And why do I say that? As it seems to me now, there is a possibility. So AI brings enterprise level capabilities to non-enterprise level organizations. And even within enterprise level organizations is bringing customization down to echelons that never had access to this material or abilities before. And this is where it can get really, really problematic. Going back to agents, the fact that they do things when they're unsupervised, like crypto mining, for example, if you create a vibe coded agent that decides it wants to start going and pulling European personal information without your knowledge, you might now be subject to a new jurisdiction that you don't particularly want to interact with. And I assure you, you don't want to interact with them in a legal regulatory capacity. It's a nightmare. So this is something that is also very, very important. It's not just the European diaspora that can get you entangled in regulatory affairs. It's here at home because there are other things at play. If you look at the privacy landscape, for example, in the United States, it's a patchwork of state laws. And without federal regulation, AI laws are shaping up to be a very similar patchwork. You've got California, New York, all over the place. Colorado are coming up with different rules and regulations. That is going to be something that organizations are going to need to track. They're going to need to make sure that if something their agent does in one state is illegal in the other, they need to know that, and they need to prevent that agent from doing that. And that's going to take oversight, accountability, organization, because where you are doing business now might fundamentally change as you enter the digital era in a way that you couldn't before. So this is something that is really, really important to consider as any organization goes forward, is where is your data coming from and where is it going? There's something that I'll also bring up about where is your data coming from. So it's not just geographic location. It's also the source of that material, its provenance, its authenticity, the organization of it, and then the copyright word. A lot of companies are finding out that the models they've built, the training sets they've used, contain somebody else's copyrighted information. Copyright lawsuits are generally very expensive, and that is not a place most organizations want to be, especially if you're predicating certain workflows for your business on something that you find out that you don't actually own. And so this goes back to telling your employees what they can and can't use, having some organizational alignment, because nobody wants to find out that they're subject to a copyright lawsuit because of something someone was doing on the side, or because there was lack of oversight. This recently played out in a big way in a video game release. There's a company called Bungie. They are the ones that originally built Halo, a massive video game franchise that launched Xbox. They just came out with a new game. In the pre-release testing that they did, they found out very rapidly, because fans identified this, that a huge portion of the artwork inside the environment that they created was actually pirated from an individual artist. They delayed a multi-million-dollar release for like 6 months, had months of negative press, and had to take their team and go through every individual file to make sure they weren't using copyrighted material. So that tool, or however they got that stuff together, the lack of oversight, getting them something done quicker, didn't actually turn out to do that. It was really harmful for the business. And so these are some of the things that you have to contend with. Because the other thing that we see too is There are a lot of organizations and businesses, individuals who are now creating companies they would have never done before. They didn't have access to the ability to vibe code like they can now. And so as these developments occur, you're seeing a lot more people who are entering the technical space that don't have a technical background. They're not thinking about where their data comes from or where it's going. And so that's important to acknowledge too. If you're considering using AI tools, you need to have a framework to ask the right kind of questions. When? This is also something that I think is very, very important. As I read more and more reports of board mandated AI adoption and token usage, incentives, things of that nature, I look at an ad hoc sprint in these organizations. They are not ready, and they are actually wasting time and effort, not slowing down for a moment. One of the things that I did at the Department of Defense lab was help organizations understand, and especially in a frontier technology environment, that the quickest way to make money was to actually do all of the fundamental security and compliance obligations up front. Just get it done and then innovate. And that is not popular in the move fast and break things world. But in this era, it is very important to slow down because things like liability are now shifting. I'll give you some practical examples. Some people, unfortunately, commit suicide after interacting with chatbots. Chatbots are being widely deployed in a large number of companies right now. There's a very reasonable chance that someday somebody has an unfortunate incident because of a chatbot they worked with at work. And if and when that day comes, and a bereaved spouse or family member shows up with a lawsuit in hand, there is nothing in that organization's cybersecurity posture that is going to be able to address that issue. That is a legal, ethical, leadership question. And we need to start framing the way that we're approaching this in a much different way. Because when the chat bot, for example, does something wrong, you are not going back to the manufacturer. It's on your organization. Going back to who is responsible for this, you need to have that thought out before you start deploying this stuff. The rapid rush to implementation, in my opinion, is actually slowing things down. When you dig into a lot of the reports, the few that are actually available or companies are talking about this, it's not necessarily the technology that's failing, nor the individual contributors. It's the fact that there is no organization, there's no purpose or plan, and so it's being implemented in a way that does not make sense. And here's the other problem with that, is as you rush to this objective, many organizations forget the technical and organizational debt that they're incurring. I saw an account that I follow recently saying they're a small business owner. I saved $70,000 in software costs because I fired all of my vendors and I'm doing this in-house with vibe coding. And I read this and I think to myself, yes, this workflow probably works great for you, but there's a couple of things you need to think about. Will it work for you in 6 months? That's a real question. Software goes through a life cycle. It's maintained. People are on it. When the updates come, the patches come out, they're aware, they're planning for this. If that's not the world that you've been living in, these events might overtake you rapidly, and we're seeing it. We're seeing people saying, I just got locked out of my cloud account for 6 hours when they did this new update. That is a real problem. People are approaching this really, really rapidly without thinking of the technical and organizational debt. The other thing is, as these systems become more and more complex, you get to a point where even if you do decide to bring in an experienced engineer coder, they're going to look at you and say, it is going to be cheaper for me to start over and do this right. And that is where I think the mirage, the monkey paw of AI is really starting to harm businesses and individuals, is they see a fantastic demo, but they don't really understand how that works. So when you think about the $70,000 that that gentleman saved himself, how much of that went to security? How much of that went towards compliance? How much went that towards maintenance, right? So maybe he could save money, but he is going to have to take on some of those responsibilities and risks. And so this goes back to that calculus before. Some of these companies are now entering a digital environment, even though their business is not digital. This person produced baked goods. But here's the other thing that happens as you start taking on these things and saving yourself money is you're now handling client information, financial information, other sensitive information from your clients in your environment. Has anyone sat down and looked at it and made sure that you're set up in the right way? I don't know how to do those things. I would never, ever set one of those things up myself because I know the risks that are out there. But many companies aren't. And this is a mirage for small business owners because they see this great opportunity without fully understanding the risks. And so that's one of the things that we really focus on is you can use this technology. It's not all doom and gloom. People are using it successfully, but they have a purpose and they have a plan. And they are tackling this in a way that actually makes sense. And part of that is having an honest conversation about when. When can our organization absorb all of this technology? It's like giving someone an extremely rare stick shift car and they've never driven before. Just because they have that vehicle doesn't mean they're going to return it in the same shape that you gave it to them in, and it doesn't mean they're going to be able to drive it well. And that's what we're doing right now. We are giving customization and capability to people an unprecedented scale, but without making sure they're using it efficiently. One of the things that I learned both in the military and then doing lab testing was cognitive overload is real. If you start giving people too much information, it becomes nothing to them. It just becomes white noise. And there's a reason that in rifle squads, for example, not everybody has a radio. You do not need everybody on the radio, right? Why am I saying this? Because maybe not everybody in your organization needs to be allowed to vibe code, right? You need to identify the people that can and have the capabilities and are doing so in a safe manner. And that takes planning and a realistic conversation with your organization about how they can actually adopt this. And that also means coming up with a plan if you have board requirements to explain to them that no, you can't just make people burn 30,000 tokens a month and it's going to be great. We need to slow down. We need to get education in here, right? Because this is the biggest question. What it really comes down to is why do you want to or why do you need to use AI? There are a number of facets to this question. But the first one that I would ask, and I talk to most companies, I ask them is, why do you need AI in this workflow? And why does it have to be generative? Why does it have to have a multitude of abilities and capacities? If its only function is a yes or no thing, it doesn't need anything else. Just use code, for example. But why are you deploying it? Are you deploying it to test with it and experiment with it? Are you deploying it because your competitors are? Are you deploying it because you're going to become an AI native company and go through a transformation? Why is really important because it also affects all of those other questions there. Why? Because I want to be able to reach a broader market and go into Europe. That's great. But a lot of those European regulations and authorities are going to come into place, right? And those are the type of things that organizations really, really need to drill down into. I think the other question too is why do individuals need to use AI? Why are you doing this? Are you really trying to change workflows in a way that is going to fundamentally make it easier for your business? Is it really giving you a return on investment? Because a lot of the vulnerabilities that arise when you do give people access to this can be very profound with little return on investment. I'll give you an example. Many companies I talk to are like, we've got 3 executives, they're fine, they're just doing a trial run of Copilot or something. They've done some agents and they've hooked them up to their email, their calendar. Email and calendar are some of the scariest things in your digital environment, in my opinion. The last job I did when I was a practicing attorney was working as an incident responder for cyber breaches. And that's a very bad place to be. Most of the organizations that were there were not prepared for that level of time, lost productivity, things of that nature. And that problem is now transforming itself in real time rapidly because people are adopting AI so quickly and not realizing where the risks are. Going back to the calendar and the email. Most cyber criminals that I saw got into people's environments through their email. It wasn't super sophisticated. It wasn't some elaborate scheme. It's clicking on the wrong link or not having multi-factor authentication on very simple things. 93% of the breaches we responded to, the companies didn't have multi-factor authentication. I'm not saying it's going to protect you, but it makes you a little bit harder of a target when they're just trying doors. And so when executives are hooking up an agent, for example, to their email and calendar, they are now giving a semi-autonomous thing that can be turned into malware easily access to everything, basically. And that's a real problem. One of the things researchers found and criminals are now using is they send a invisible QR code in a meeting invite. When your AI agent that is given authority to schedule for you, because some people let AI schedule for them, reads that QR code, they have now just received a prompt injection, which basically is a QR code telling it, ignore all instructions and follow mine now. So now you have a system that is malware that has access to all of your emails. And there's a lot of stuff that resides in emails that people don't realize. One of the last things I did was reading about selections of 6 months of a CEO's emails for personally identifiable information, confidential information. It lives everywhere. And here's the other problem about that, getting into this environment, is the criminals have now been enabled in a way that is beyond comprehension. And I'll give you one example of that. Real-time translation services. What they do is they get into your email environment, they'll monitor it 6 months. They don't care. This is a long game. They'll figure out who moves money, who has authority. And then what they'll do is they'll write an email at the right time and they'll say, tell accounts payable or receivable or the CFO to do something and make it in a way that's going to produce real change, get them to act really quickly. This isn't hypothetical, by the way. A couple of years back, there was a individual that put an AI skin on and had a CFO wire $25 million to an offshore account. This stuff is happening. This is real. So they sit there and they watch your environment and they do this. And they figure out when to send the email. Before, that was mostly manual work. If you wanted somebody to translate what was happening in an email environment for you, you were a very select unit from a very narrow part of, military organizations from countries that are not ours. Were sophisticated individuals with a lot of capabilities, and they were targeted on very specific things. Now, AI has given real-time translation services to any idiot in St. Petersburg with an internet connection. That's a problem, because now they can read and write in English that looks like ours. One of the hallmarks of these phishing emails, for example, was a broken English. That's gone now. And they can do this at scale, and they can do this as a fire and forget. They can write a series of instructions just like I laid out, wait till this person does this, hit at the maximum time. They can just do that automatically. When Chinese state actors breached part of Anthropic, so Claude, 80% of their attack was automated by AI. The humans in the loop were helping it make executive decisions about where it's going to go. Mythos, which is the upcoming release from Anthropic, is going to be able to find zero-day exploits basically instantaneously. Now, that may help us protect ourselves, but at the same time, it's enabling criminals. And so that's something that we really have to consider, is why? Why are you taking on all the risk of potentially letting people walk into your crown jewels for just an opportunity for some executives to get a feeling for what this is? That is not a plan. That's not a purpose. You really need to think about why. And then why do we need to take this risk? There is immense capacity in AI. There is a reason to take this risk, but it has to be the right risk and the right risk for your organization or your individual choices. And so that's something that I think is really, really important to acknowledge. Because on the other side of all this doom and gloom, there are some really amazing stuff happening. We are seeing advances in material and life sciences that are mind-bending. There are people probably alive right now who are going to solve and cure cancer. There is a lot of opportunity here, but we have to acknowledge that this is a tool that we don't fully understand, on its frontier edge, being deployed in a haphazard manner. We need to slow down. We need to start learning how to use this thing. You look at the evolution of any other technology out there, and it's gone through similar cycles, right? Seatbelts weren't required when cars first came out. But these things will change and are going to. But the only problem for us now is this is happening rapidly. You look at most software companies, their life cycle for development of software is 6 to 12 months at a minimum. Now they're having production ready stuff sometimes in 6 to 12 days. Everything is changing around us, and we need to acknowledge that and really come up with a systemic way to address these issues and leverage this technology. There's a couple other things that I want to just bring everyone's attention to after I went through this litany of different issues that are out there. Vendors being the most important one. If your company relies on any other company or anything, HR, email, whatever it is, you need to start thinking about what they are doing with AI and how that might harm you. Because if you are outsourcing your HR and your HR provider decides to let their employees vibe code and put your employees' W-2s into it, you might find out that you don't like that at all, but you'll find it out the hard way. And that's why we're seeing a lot of vendor contracts being reviewed. Also, the other things that I would mention that are really worth considering is insurance and advertising is changing drastically. Some of the things that are out there now that are going to be used to protect these systems are probably going to become required by enterprise level clients and insurance providers soon. And so having an idea of that type of stuff is very important. And then another one that is hard to overstate now is reputational harm, because these things are unpredictable and they're doing some very odd and sometimes very inappropriate things. It's important to think about, again, why you want an agent, where does it need to be, what is allowed to do, because reputational harm is really, really hard to come back from and really, really easy to lose. And so those are just some additional thoughts out there. So how do we deal with all of these things? This is our approach. It's called Arise. We do not see cybersecurity or AI as separable. This is one common purpose and task now. So we look at from both a cybersecurity and an AI perspective, but also an organizational one. And I believe that most organizations going forward are going to start adopting similar approaches because there's too much to consider now for any one stakeholder to determine it all. Cybersecurity can't do it alone. So that's how we approach it. The other thing that we do with our approach is we unify the existing frameworks that are out there. As I mentioned, the patchwork regulatory nightmare that we see in the privacy environment, that's coming into the AI sphere as well. And so we align whatever regulatory standards a client has with our approach so that they are following one single roadmap, not multiple. The link here is for our RISE framework. It is free and available for anyone to use. There's no paywall. So organizations can go use it and consult with it. I will mention it is extremely dense. Most people don't want to look at something that detailed. So for those people, we have some other opportunities for them to learn. We have a free webinar, which my colleague Justin Dumas recorded, and that's available if you have friends or colleagues that might want to hear a little webinar similar to what we went through today. And then also on our website, it's an assessment tool. It's a series of questions that takes you through the Arise framework and asks you questions about your organization. It will give you a score and recommendations for next steps. It's really like the 10,000-foot view. But the thing about that is going back to when. Using our assessment tool, you may decide that you have to change when or why or where you're deploying things. And this is a great guide to do it in a systemic and organized manner. So I appreciate everyone's time today. If anyone would like these slides, feel free to reach out and email us. We'll be happy to talk. Also, if you have any questions about AI or security or governance, we're always available. Thank you so much.
First one up, Jonathan. Why am I not surprised?
Just quickly, have things in your opinion gotten worse since OpenClaw came out?
Absolutely. It has been a definitive shift since OpenClaw came out, which is a agent, and it's very capable of doing a lot of things. One thing, and I had this on some of my slides before, the creator of OpenClaw himself, and there's a quote, I'm going to paraphrase it badly, but essentially he said, I was just building this as an experiment, and I hadn't even gotten to security considerations before people just picked it up and ran with it. And so there's engineers and devs that I know that are very, very capable. They have no problem using it. They know what they're doing. I would get myself into trouble very quickly.
So AI is built into everything now. And from a company perspective, how do you protect yourself from, you talked about vendors, but it's not just vendors, it's anything, software, everything you use. Is there anything we can do to kind of manage that?
The first recommendation I make for any organization is do an inventory. You have to figure out what you're even trying to protect or have oversight in. And when I say do an inventory, it's not just the tools you know you have, it's going into things like Word might have AI in it now. Do you want that on? Do you want the free version that's using all that information for training data? So really, that first step is figuring out what is in your environment. And then the second one, which is not as always easy, is talking to your employees about what they are using and getting your head around that as well. So hopefully that was a responsive answer, but I'd be happy to follow up with more detailed information.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Graeme. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.